Good morning and welcome to Madison Live. I'm Olivia Coleman. I hope you had a lovely St. Patrick's Day and enjoyed those great warm days we had. Now, we are going to hear from Tommy about the news of the weird. I'm here with Dr. Steve Whitmire, Associate Professor of Structural Geology and Tectonics here at JMU. So tell me a little bit more about your position, your favorite class, stuff like that.
So in the Geology and Environmental Science department, we teach in general both upper level classes for our majors as well as intro classes. And usually I teach one of each a semester, and it's nice to do the upper level classes with the majors. We do a lot of field trips. We go to West Virginia, places like Seneca Rocks, and we also go over to the Blue Ridge and places like that. But I also like teaching the intro classes a lot because it's nice to reach a broad spectrum of students and really get them enthusiastic about the world around them. So it's hard to say what my favorite class is, but it's a great place to do geology here in the Shenandoah Valley.
I know, so you said teach general classes. How often do you see kids who come in with not much interest in geology but leave the class possibly even more interested or maybe even going into the field?
So I'd like to say that everybody that comes and takes one of my geology classes thinks it's fantastic, and I'm sure that's not true. But I've seen a lot of feedback from people that are, usually the comment is, I didn't think I'd like it as much as I do, or it was a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. And you know, for a general education class, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. So you went to San Jose, California most recently for the AAAS conference. Can you tell me about that acronym and just what went down there?
Sure. So we were asked to run a session at the conference, basically invite some people in as speakers and talk specifically about geospatial things. And the conference is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So they have a lot of different types of sessions, a lot of different scientific disciplines, a lot of reporters in the audience, a lot of basically, I don't know if I want to say politicians, but administrators in the audience as well. So it's sort of a broad overview of a lot of different topics. And so our session was called Imaging Information Intelligently, and it was basically focused on geospatial themes. And what that means is anything, any sort of information that has place-based context. So you can think of your car's GPS, right? I mean, it tells you where you are at that time. Or any news item that might happen at a certain city, right? It's all place-based at some level. And so there's a whole realm of investigations for geologists, geographers, a lot of other types of people that focus on geospatial things. And that's what we wanted to highlight.
Great, and you had a panel about 5 speakers who you invited along. How many did you have to choose from? How hard was it to just get 5 people on your team?
Yeah, so we could have gone a lot of different directions with it and asked a lot of different types of people. We tried to focus on people that we thought would have a high impact, and we also wanted to vary the group of people. So we had somebody else from JMU, Dr. Bob Colvord, who's now the Dean of CISE. He came out to talk about his geospatial semester course that he's run for several years. So that got the whole education end of things into it. We had one of the Google program managers come and talk to us about some of the Google spatial stuff that they were doing. We had, Dr. Jen Piatek, who's from Connecticut. She came out and talked about gigapans, which are these ways of making zoomable pictures, zoomable images, so that you can start with a really broad brush view of like the Grand Canyon, and then you can zoom into somebody standing down there on the river. It's really neat, and from an educational viewpoint, it's cool. So we tried to get a variety of different things. We had a couple of international people as well.
So right here we have a graphic on the screen that's showing your analysis of India's tectonic path. Explain how this will happen.
So one of the things that I like to focus on in my research is I use geospatial technologies and virtual globes like Google Earth. So this is a Google Earth image. And I try and show how the Earth has changed through time. And being an associate professor of tectonics, which is sort of geologic history through time, what this image is showing you is I'm trying to show you how India has moved over the last 80 million years. And basically it's from when India was connected to Africa, basically sort of in the southern hemisphere, and then over the last 80 million years it has basically migrated across what is today the Indian Ocean and has impacted Asia. And that impact created the Himalayan mountains. And it's actually still pushing into Asia, so the Mount Everest is still rising a little bit. But by using a virtual globe like this, and actually you can have time animations that show things change, my viewpoint is that's a really good educational tool, because it allows students to see that things are changing, how are they changing, and then we've advanced beyond this India one to now we have now one that shows all the continents moving through time over the past 150 million years. So you can see how India's movement relates to North America's movement. It all starts with the Pangaea supercontinent, and then all the pieces break up and move around the globe. So it's a great tool from an educational standpoint to show these time-based processes that a lot longer than you and I are going to live, right? So,
what's a measurable amount of time to really see even the smallest kind of difference? Is it a week, can you see something, or is it more a monthly, yearly basis?
it really depends on the process that you're looking at. So if you wanted to look at, say, a landslide, that's going to happen over the space of, maybe minutes to maybe an hour. So that's a really short time span geologically, right? Or you could look at, say, shoreline change, right? So over a few years and a few winter storms, you might see a beach change or a beach migrate. For tectonics, for actually plates moving around on the surface of the earth or continents moving, they move at about the rate that your fingernail grows. So we're talking about 2 centimeters a year. Okay. So in order to really see things move, you usually talk about millions of years as your unit.
Wow. So you were talking earlier about Google and your speakers, a couple of them were from there. So what is it like working with Google personally?
So I've been out on the Google campus twice. We actually ran a conference out there where they hosted us for 5 days. This was a few years ago. And it's a really interesting place. I mean, it's a very different environment. You've probably heard a certain amount about this, but their work environment's very different. They've got all sorts of stuff. People will work for a while, then they'll play for a while and do something, then they'll come back and work. And so it's all free food and all that sort of stuff. So they're really hospitable. They've got a lot of resources that you can use when you go there and interact with them. Most of them are pretty laid back, but they work all the time. They're always working. If they're not working, they might be playing or they might be napping, but people are there at midnight, at 2 a.m. programming, things like that. So it's a very neat environment if you're a young adult or a young person. It's a little bit harder to visualize that environment if you are older with a family, because that dynamic doesn't fit quite so well. So it's a really interesting place. There's no old people there. Everybody's young, which is really cool and really neat if you're just coming out of school and get into that sort of thing. And they're fun to work with because they're really dynamic. So yeah,
so
it's been
there's
neat.
Google Work and Google Play,
Right, exactly. And it's all intertwined. It's all the same sort of thing. It's neat.
Well, thank you, Dr. Whitmire. Right after this break, get excited for our musical guest, Nick Saito. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us, and tune in next week for another edition of Madison Live.